This morning, bright and early, my friend John and I decided to go fishing. We live in a very small town and there's never much to do. We were dying of boredom. However, this morning, it was even more quiet than usual. The streets were empty and there was nobody around. The town was eerily quiet. We went down an overgrown path that led to the river. When we got there, we saw a strange figure in a dark green hood crouching on the riverbank. He was holding a fishing rod in his hand. "Good morning," I called out. "Are the fish biting today?" The man didn't answer. He just gave a hoarse laugh and started to sway slightly from side to side. I went closer and asked again, "Are the fish biting?" I took 2 more steps, then stopped in my tracks. The man began to sway faster and faster. I couldn't see his face because it was obscured by the hood. Just then, I saw something that horrified me. At his feet, there was a human hand, severed at the wrist. I felt a chill run down my spine and I started to back away. The man slowly turned his head to face me. I saw a pair of piercing red eyes and sharp dark yellow teeth. Instead of a nose, he just had 2 triangular holes. He stared directly at me and opened his mouth in a bloody grin. I turned back and ran back to John. Not knowing what I had seen, he looked at me in bewilderment. I glanced behind me. The man in the hood was standing up and coming towards us. Without waiting to see what would happen next, I grabbed John by the hand and dragged him with me, shouting, "Run!" We rushed into the trees, looking back over our shoulders every 5 seconds to make sure the man wasn't following us. We sprinted through the undergrowth and made our way to the police station. On the way, I told John in a trembling voice about the severed hand and the man's terrifying face. He was now scared as well. When we reached the police station, I pulled on the door handle, but it was locked. We both pounded on the glass, but there was no answer. "Listen, I'm going to go see if I can get inside," I said. "You stay here and keep watch in case that crazy guy comes back." John was shaking and said, "But I'm scared. What am I going to do if he—" I didn't let him finish. I ran around the corner and found an open window at the back of the building. I climbed up through it and found myself in the bathroom of the police station. When I opened the door, I peered out and saw a dark corridor. The light was flickering ominously. Summoning all my courage, I walked down the hallway and came to an office. The room was empty and there were papers and furniture strewn across the floor. The phone was broken into pieces and the desk had been overturned. Just then, I heard someone shouting. It was coming from the street and it sounded like John. I was about to rush to the front door and let him in when I heard a rustling sound. Suddenly, another door in the corridor opened and I saw a figure lurking in the darkness. "Who's there?" I demanded. There was no response, but I saw 2 familiar red eyes peering at me from the darkness. I froze in horror. For a moment, I was so petrified that I couldn't move. The figure emerged from the darkness and stepped into the dim, flickering light. It was the same face I had seen at the river, but he was wearing different clothes. It was a policeman's uniform. Suddenly, the man came towards me at lightning speed. He covered a distance of 3 meters in less than a second and grabbed me by the throat with his strong, bony hands. The man stuck out his black tongue, licking his lips and gnashing his crooked teeth. As I watched in horror, his face started shifting and changing right before my eyes. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed the first thing I could find. It was a pen. I raised it above my head and with all my might I drove it into the man's neck. Bright red blood gushed from the wound and the man let out a high-pitched screech. His grip loosened on my neck and I managed to break free. I rushed down the hallway and yanked open the first door I saw. Inside, there was a pile of human flesh and gnawed bones. The sight made my stomach turn and a wave of nausea came over me. I fell to my knees and threw up on the ground. I was shaking with fear. I realized that this was the remains of the other policemen. Just then, I remembered John. He was waiting for me outside. I ran to the front door and opened it, and when I saw the familiar face of John on the other side, I wanted to cry. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "I heard you shouting." John nodded. "Everything is fine," he said. "I thought I saw someone moving around inside. Let's go home before that crazy guy comes back." We ran all the way home, and when we reached John's house, we found that his parents were not there. On the table, there was a note. "Gone to visit your grandmother. Will be back late tonight." We went across the empty house, securing all the windows and locking all the doors. We were barricading ourselves inside. John was surprisingly calm. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold anything. After we finished securing the house, I picked up the phone to try and get help, but there was no dial tone. We were cut off from the rest of the world. We sat down in the living room and turned on the TV. There was nothing on the news. Everything was going on as usual. Whatever was happening, it seemed to just be confined to our little town. I took out a pen and a sheet of paper and tried to write down exactly what happened to us. I don't know why, but somehow it made me feel better. If we don't make it through this, then at least someone will find this piece of paper and know what happened to us. John is sitting beside me right now, but he is strangely pale. I asked him if he is okay, but he just shrugged his shoulders. Something's wrong. He got up and went into the bathroom. He's there now. All of a sudden, a wild fear seized me. Maybe it's just my paranoia going out of control. From head to toe, looked at the pen in his hands. "Cannot be," flashed through my head. Trying to speak very loudly but calmly, I asked John, "By the way, where's your sister? Did she go with your parents?" I heard his voice from the bathroom saying, "Probably." As the realization slowly sunk in, a cold wave of horror washed over me and I put my head in my hands. I wanted to cry. John doesn't have a sister. In the uneasy silence, I can hear the bathroom door opening with an ominous creak. Hello. What you're about to read will shock you. I need to confess the strange and terrible crime I have committed, and I can't bear to keep my secret any longer. I beg you not to stop listening. For years, I have hidden myself away from the world. You see, I'm hideously ugly, too ugly to describe. You would be shocked and horrified at the sight of my face. I was a miserable and wretched creature because I never knew love. I never felt the affectionate touch of a hand or the warm feeling of a pair of lips brushing against mine. I was a carpenter by trade, and I worked all day in a factory making furniture. My specialty is making chairs. My skilled hands carved the wood, screwed the pieces together, fashioned the backrests and armrests, and did the upholstery, patting the cushions and sewing the covers. As I worked, I felt like an artist creating a great masterpiece. When my chairs were finished, I would always test them out to make sure they were comfortable. It gave me great thrill to imagine all the different people who would sit on the chair I created. Unlike me, they had wonderful, happy lives. They had someone they loved and who would love them back. Every time I thought of them, I felt nothing but misery and despair. One day, when I was designing a new type of chair, and as I worked, a very strange idea began to take over in my mind. I changed the design and made a hollowed space inside. It was a cavity large enough to fit a human body. Of course, I had to take out a lot of the wooden framework and the springs inside. The knees would just be below the seat, and the head and the upper body would be inside the backrest. Someone could sit inside the chair and no one would ever know they were there. I left a small space for supplies like food and drinks, and I even included a little potty for, those times where you have to go to the bathroom. By the time I was finished, the chair had become a miniature home. I stripped off my clothes and I climbed inside the chair. Can you imagine how strange that felt? It was a tight fit, but I managed to get used to it after a while. I was in complete darkness, but I can hear what was going on around me. I heard my colleagues walking around the factory looking for me. They had no idea that I was right under their noses. After a while, some delivery men loaded me up on a truck and transported me to a furniture store. They put me on display in the middle of the shop floor and left me there. I was perfectly concealed and nobody was any the wiser. I was like a crab or a turtle, but instead of a shell, I had my chair. As soon as I arrived, customers started testing out the chair. I can't tell you how many unknown bottoms sat down on me. Some of them had big fat bottoms like jellyfish, and the others had thin bony ones like a skeleton. Some were firm, and others had chubby ones, bouncing up and down on me like a rubber ball. It was an amazing feeling. I could feel the warmth of their flesh through the material. Their shoulders rested against my chest and their arms and hands rested on mine. Not one of them suspected that the soft cushion they were sitting on was actually little old me. Previously, because of my grotesque and disturbing appearance, people had always recoiled at the sight of me. But now my skin was virtually touching theirs through a thin layer of cloth. Hidden inside the chair, I imagined myself hugging them and wrapping my arms around them in a passionate embrace. Of course, it was a strange sort of existence. After spending so long inside the chair, sitting in the same position, my muscles started to wither away. I could barely move and my body was crooked and bent. I was folded up like a contortionist, but I didn't care. All I could think about was the exquisite feeling of having people sit on me. One day, somebody bought my chair. The delivery man picked me up, put me in the back of a van, and brought me to the home of a nice family. They put me in their living room facing the TV. Within days, every member of the family had sat on me at least once. I was in heaven. But there was one member of the family I loved more than all the others. This person was very special to me, and as time went on, I began to fall in love with them. I couldn't help myself. Whenever they sat down on me, I tried to make my knees as comfortable as possible for them. Whenever they leaned back on me, I would embrace them more warmly and make them nice and snug. When they felt tired, I would move my knees back and forth, gently rocking them to sleep. You may think I was mad, but I was madly in love with this person. I became obsessed with them, and I longed for them to return my feelings. I reached the point where I felt that if they knew I was there, they would fall in love with me too. The person loved to read, so I came up with a cunning plan. I wrote my own story and submitted it to a website they frequent. By now, you've probably guessed who I'm talking about. That's right, it's you. I've been in your home for so long, you've probably forgotten where I came from. Every night I crawl out of the chair and sneak upstairs to watch you sleep. I can't bear to be away from you for a moment. I love you and I think you could love me too, if only you saw me. Now, after you finish listening to this, Please turn around and look at me. I'll be waiting. Don't be afraid. Come and sit down on my knees. I miss your touch. I had a best friend. His name was Billy. When we went to school together and hung out all the time. Then, one day, Billy stopped coming to school. I didn't see him for weeks. There were rumors that he had suffered a nervous breakdown. One evening when my parents were out, there was a knock on the door. When I answered it, Billy was standing there. He was acting very strangely. His eyes were tired and bloodshot, and he looked like he was very nervous. He was looking around and kept glancing over his shoulder. I need to talk to you, he said. I invited him in and closed the door. He sat down on the couch, but he couldn't relax. Something was really bothering him. He was twitching and his leg was shaking. Are you okay? I asked. My parents think I'm crazy, he said. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Even I thought I was crazy for a while. And, are you crazy? I asked. Billy let out a humorless chuckle. Look out the window, he said. Why? Just do me a favor. Look out the window and tell me, what do you see? I decided to humor him, so I opened the curtains and peered out. What do you see? He asked. Well, I see some houses, some cars, some streetlights. Exactly, he said. And do you notice anything strange? No, I said. You see those streetlights? He asked. They're supposed to be on, but they're not. They're all off. How could every light on the street be off? Who do you think did that? I don't know, I said. Who? Billy lowered his voice and whispered, The Thin Man. What are you talking about? I asked in astonishment. I heard rumors about him before, Billy said, but I thought it was just an urban legend. It's not. The Thin Man is real. He hates the streetlights. He looks just like a normal man at first, but when he unfolds himself, he's really tall and really thin, just like a streetlight. And he's dressed all in gray, just like a streetlight. He hides behind them, and when it starts to get dark outside, all the streetlights aren't on. You wouldn't even know he was there. How do you know all this? I asked. Because I've seen him, Billy replied. When? A few weeks ago, I was kicking a football around in the park, and I accidentally kicked it into the bushes. I went in to get it, and that's when I saw him. He seemed just like an ordinary man standing in the street. He was looking up and down the block, and then, when he thought nobody was watching, he just sort of unfolded himself. He turned into something tall and thin, and he hid behind the streetlight. All of a sudden, I heard a click, and the lights went out. Then he just sort of slid to the next streetlight, and I heard another click, and that one went out too. He did it all down the block. Click, slide, click, slide, click, slide, until all the lights, they were out. That's when he noticed me. All of a sudden our eyes met, and I knew that he had seen me, and he knew that I had seen him. I started running, and I didn't look back. When I got home, I locked all the doors. For a long time after that, I was afraid to leave the house. Then I realized it was dangerous at night. That was the only time. It's usually safe during the day. He only comes out at night. He hates being seen. Nobody believes me. My parents took me to a psychiatrist, and she didn't believe me either. Do you believe me? Sure, Billy, I said, trying to humor him. Yeah, I believe you. No, you don't, he said, disappointed. Anyway, even if you don't believe me, I thought I'd better warn you. After all, you are my best friend. And with that, Billy got up and said goodbye. At the front door, he looked all around to make sure it was safe and then took off running. I watched him until he was out of sight, then I went back inside. I felt really sad. I felt like my best friend had lost his mind. That was until the next morning when the police found Billy. He had been folded. There was no blood and guts, but every bone in his body had been broken. He'd been folded up into a tiny little bundle. The police didn't even know what they'd found at first until they picked it up and saw his flattened face. His mother had to go down to the police station and identify him. When they brought her into the room to show her his remains, she fainted. He was just a tiny bundle of flesh and bone, and clothes and hair. He had been folded. Ever since I heard the news, I've been on edge. I can't stop thinking about the crazy things Billy told me. But suddenly, they don't seem so crazy. I haven't been able to sleep. I'm tired and my eyes are bloodshot. I'm nervous all the time, and I always find myself looking over my shoulder. This morning when I left for school, I counted the street lamps on my road. When I came home this evening, I counted them again. There was one too many.
If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons. And I'll see you all next time.